The Natalie Wood mystery is finally solved, and it isn't good. For 4 decades, the death of Natalie Wood has been described as a tragic accident. A beautiful movie star who slipped from her yacht into dark waters off Catalina Island one November night in 1981, this version of events, initially accepted by authorities and the public alike, painted her death as a random tragedy, a terrible mishap that cut short a brilliant life and legendary career. But beneath this convenient narrative lies a disturbing collection of inconsistencies, changing testimonies, and forensic evidence that tells a very different story. Today, we're examining the troubling truth behind one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. The death of Natalie Wood wasn't the simple accident we've been led to believe. From unexplained bruises to conflicting accounts, from delayed emergency calls to reopened investigations, the real story of what happened aboard the yacht Splendor that night reveals a dark chapter in Hollywood history that powerful figures have worked for decades to keep hidden. What you're about to learn will transform how you see not just Natalie Wood's tragic end, but the forces that created and maintained a sanitized version of events that the evidence increasingly contradicts. The mystery of Natalie Wood's death isn't a mystery anymore, but the truth it reveals is more disturbing than most people are prepared to accept. The night of November 28, 1981, seemed routine enough. A holiday weekend boat trip to Catalina Island aboard the yacht Splendor, with actress Natalie Wood, her husband Robert Wagner, her Brainstorm co-star Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain Dennis Davern. By the next morning, Wood's body would be found floating in the water, and a hastily constructed narrative about an accidental drowning would begin taking shape. A narrative that has unraveled thread by thread the decades since. To truly understand what happened to Natalie Wood, we need to examine 6 critical elements that standing evidence that points not to a tragic accident, but to something far more sinister. Let's uncover the carefully buried truth about Natalie Wood's final hours and the troubling questions that remain unanswered despite decades of investigation.
Done any work, and it made a very, very deep impression, more so than some other pictures that I did later.
1. She was found floating face down, but her injuries didn't match the story. On the morning of November 29, 1981, the body of Natalie Wood was discovered floating face down in the Pacific Ocean, approximately a mile away from the yacht Splendor, where she had been spending the Thanksgiving weekend with her husband, Robert Wagner, actor Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. She was wearing only a nightgown and a down jacket, clothing inconsistent with someone who had deliberately set out in a small boat, but plausible for someone who might have fallen accidentally into the water. The initial explanation provided to authorities and the media aligned with this accidental scenario. According to the first statements from those aboard the yacht, Wood had apparently attempted to secure the yacht's dinghy, which had been banging against the hull and disturbing her sleep. In this version of events, she slipped while trying to adjust the small boat, falling into the cold waters where she ultimately drowned. This account seemed plausible on its surface. Wood was known to be uncomfortable around water despite her glamorous image, a fear stemming from a childhood incident during a film shoot where she nearly drowned. The night had been dark, the waters rough, and alcohol had been consumed by all parties throughout the evening. The Los Angeles County coroner initially accepted this explanation, ruling her death an accidental drowning. But the physical evidence told a different story, one that began emerging even during the initial autopsy, but wasn't fully appreciated until forensic experts revisited the case. Decades later, Wood's body bore multiple fresh bruises on her arms, legs, and face that weren't consistent with a simple fall into water. More tellingly, she had scratches on her forearms that appeared defensive in nature, the kind typically seen when someone raises their arms to protect themselves during an altercation. The ocean didn't leave those bruises. Someone else did, observed one forensic pathologist who reviewed the autopsy findings decades later. This stark assessment cuts to the heart of the contradiction between the official narrative and the physical evidence. Bruises and abrasions that suggested violence rather than accident. Particularly suspicious was a series of bruises on Wood's wrists and forearms that appeared to be grab marks, consistent with someone having forcefully restrained her. These injuries weren't just random marks that might occur during a fall, but rather showed distinct patterns suggesting human hands had gripped her with significant force shortly before her death. The location and nature of these injuries became increasingly significant when considered alongside the fact that Wood was discovered wearing a down jacket over her nightgown. While initially portrayed as evidence she might have been preparing to go outside voluntarily, the jacket's condition told a different story. it was unzipped and appeared to have been hastily thrown on, or possibly placed on her, rather than properly worn for deliberate protection against the elements. Also inconsistent with the accidental fall theory was the condition of Wood's fingernails. Several were broken in patterns suggesting she had frantically grabbed at something or someone shortly before entering the water. These broken nails contained no traces of wood or fiberglass that might be expected if she had been scrambling to hold onto the side of the yacht or dinghy during an accidental fall. Perhaps most damning was the timeline established by the coroner. Based on body temperature and other physiological indicators, Wood had been in the water for several hours before her body was discovered, a period during which no one aboard the yacht had reported her missing or initiated search procedures, despite her alleged fear of water making an intentional solo boat excursion highly implausible. The autopsy revealed another crucial fact that contradicted the accident narrative. Wood's blood alcohol level, while elevated, was not high enough to significantly impair her judgment or physical coordination. This finding challenged the implicit suggestion that intoxication had contributed to a hypothetical accident. She wasn't so impaired that she would have been likely to attempt securing a dinghy alone at night, an action completely out of character given her documented fear of water. When all these physical findings are considered together, the pattern of bruises indicating restraint, the defensive scratches, the broken fingernails, and the timeline of her time in the water, they paint a picture radically different from the simple accident initially portrayed to the public. The evidence suggests not a woman who slipped and fell, but one who may have been involved in a physical altercation before somehow ending up in the water, a conclusion that raises disturbing questions about who might have been on the other side of that confrontation.
They reopened the Natalie Wood thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a comment on that?
No, I never did.
You wouldn't cooperate with the...
Well, I had already had.
2. Her husband, Robert Wagner, changed his story multiple times. Robert Wagner's account of the events surrounding his wife's disappearance and death has undergone significant revisions over the years, changes that raise troubling questions about what really happened aboard the Splendor that November night. These evolving explanations, rather than clarifying the situation, have created a pattern of inconsistency that investigators find highly suspicious. In his initial statements to authorities immediately after Wood's body was discovered, Wagner claimed he had been below deck watching television after everyone else had gone to bed. According to this first version, he only realized his wife was missing when he went to their stateroom around midnight and found she wasn't there. Wagner stated he assumed she had taken the dinghy to go ashore to the nearby yacht harbor on Catalina Island, despite the fact that this would have been completely out of character for Wood, who was known to be afraid of dark water and was not known to operate the small boat alone, especially at night. This first account notably contained no mention of any arguments or tensions during the evening. Wagner portrayed the night as a pleasant, uneventful gathering of friends that somehow ended in tragedy when Wood inexplicably decided to leave the yacht alone in the middle of the night. However, as the investigation proceeded and other witnesses were interviewed, Wagner's story began to shift in significant ways. Within days, he acknowledged that there had been some tension aboard the yacht that evening, but characterized it as minor and unrelated to Wood's disappearance. He still maintained that he had no idea his wife was missing until he went looking for her around midnight. By the mid-1980s, Wagner's account had evolved further. In interviews and in his 1986 memoir, Pieces of My Heart, he admitted that he and Walken had engaged in a heated argument that evening, a significant detail absent from his initial statements. According to this revised version, the argument centered around Walken's suggestion that Wood should prioritize her acting career over family obligations. Wagner claimed that after this argument, everyone retired to their respective cabins, and he still didn't realize Wood was missing until around midnight. The most dramatic revision came years later. By 2008, Wagner had further modified his account to acknowledge that he had actually argued directly with Wood that night, not just with Walken. This was a crucial detail that had been completely absent from his previous versions. In this updated narrative, Wagner admitted to being jealous of Wood's relationship with Walken and confronting her about it, though he continued to insist that this argument was resolved before everyone went to bed. He didn't push her, he said. He just didn't follow her, noted one investigator who tracked the evolution of Wagner's statements. This observation captures the fundamental problem with Wagner's changing narrative. Each revision has acknowledged more conflict and tension aboard the yacht that night, while still maintaining that these tensions had no connection to Wood's mysterious disappearance. The inconsistencies in Wagner's account extend beyond just the interpersonal dynamics aboard the yacht. His explanation for the significant delay in notifying authorities about Wood's disappearance has also shifted over time. Initially, he claimed that he wasn't concerned when he couldn't find her because he assumed she had taken the dinghy to shore. Later, he suggested that he had been worried but didn't know what to do, an explanation that seems implausible for an experienced boater who would have been familiar with marine distress protocols. Perhaps most damning is Wagner's evolving account of when he last saw his wife alive. In early statements, he claimed they had parted amicably when she went to her cabin. Years later, he acknowledged they had argued, but insisted the argument ended before she disappeared. Yet physical evidence, including multiple witnesses who reported hearing a loud argument continuing late into the night, contradicts these claims. The pattern of Wagner's gradually evolving story, each version acknowledging more conflict than the last, while still denying any connection to Wood's death, raises obvious red flags for investigators. This type of incremental admission, revealing potentially damaging information only when contradictory evidence emerges, is consistent with what law enforcement recognizes as distancing behavior, a common pattern among individuals attempting to separate themselves from responsibility for a serious incident. By 2011, these accumulating inconsistencies and the new evidence that had emerged led the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department to officially name Wagner as a person of interest in Wood's death. This designation, which falls short of identifying him as a suspect but indicates he has information crucial to the investigation, represented a dramatic shift from the initial acceptance of the accident narrative. Wagner's response to this development has been perhaps the most telling shift in his position. Since being named a person of interest, he has refused to speak with investigators, attempting to resolve the remaining questions about that night. This silence represents a complete reversal from his initially cooperative stance and raises the obvious question of why someone with nothing to hide would suddenly refuse to assist in determining the truth about his wife's tragic death.
Filming a brainstorm, did that make that entire experience painful for you?
Oh, sure. I mean, it was, in so many ways, it was a terrible thing.
3. Christopher Walken was there, but said almost nothing. Of the 3 survivors from that fateful night aboard the Splendor, Christopher Walken remains perhaps the most enigmatic figure. As Wood's co-star in the science fiction film Brainstorm, which was still in production at the time of her death, Walken had been invited for the Thanksgiving weekend boat trip as a gesture of hospitality from Wagner and Wood. His presence on the yacht is undisputed, but his near-complete silence about what happened that night has fueled decades of speculation and suspicion. In the immediate aftermath of Wood's death, Walken provided a brief statement to investigators that revealed almost nothing of substance. He confirmed being aboard the yacht, but claimed to have gone to bed early, saying he neither witnessed nor heard anything unusual during the night. This statement, remarkably sparse given the circumstances, was delivered with what investigators later described as a curiously rehearsed quality, as if carefully prepared rather than offered as a spontaneous recollection. After this initial statement, Walken retreated into what has amounted to 4 decades of near-total silence about the events of that night. He has consistently refused interview requests, specifically about Wood's death, avoided discussing the subject in broader conversations about his career, and made himself unavailable to investigators who have reopened the case in recent years. When occasionally cornered by journalists, his responses have been terse to the point of opacity, acknowledging the tragedy without offering any substantive information about what he witnessed. 3 people went on that boat. Only 2 came back with a story, observed one investigator who worked on the reopened case. This assessment captures the troubling reality that of the 3 survivors, only Wagner and Davern have provided detailed accounts of that night, with Walken maintaining his position as the silent third party whose potential testimony remains locked away. This silence has generated multiple theories about Walken's motivations. One perspective suggests he was explicitly advised by attorneys to say nothing that might involve him in what could potentially become a criminal case. This legal self-protection theory gained credence in the 2011 investigation when documents revealed that Walken had retained criminal defense counsel almost immediately after Wood's body was discovered, an unusual step for someone who claimed to have no knowledge of any suspicious circumstances. Another theory holds that Walken's silence stems from fear of Wagner, who was not only a powerful Hollywood figure, but also someone Walken had personally witnessed in a state of extreme anger on the night in question. According to boat captain Dennis Davern's later testimony, Wagner had become enraged about what he perceived as inappropriate closeness between Walken and Wood during filming. If Walken witnessed behavior from Wagner that night that went beyond normal anger, his decades of silence might reflect ongoing concern about potential retaliation. A third, more sympathetic interpretation suggests Walken's reticence comes from a genuine desire to protect Wood's legacy and her family, including her 2 daughters. By this reasoning, Walken may know troubling details about that night that would only cause additional pain if made public, and has chosen discretion over disclosure out of respect for the deceased. What makes Walken's silence particularly significant is that he was reportedly the last person besides Wagner to see Wood alive. According to various reconstructions of that evening, Walken was present during at least part of the heated argument between Wagner and Wood that preceded her disappearance. His perspective on the nature and intensity of that conflict could potentially resolve crucial questions about Wood's state of mind and the dynamics aboard the yacht in those final hours. Walken's position became even more curious after the case was reopened in 2011. While he did eventually speak with investigators, the content of these conversations has never been made. Public law enforcement officials have characterized his cooperation as limited and noted that his account still lacks the detailed observations that might help clarify the sequence of events on the yacht. The contrast between Walken's successful, decades-long Hollywood career following Wood's death and his absolute refusal to discuss that night creates an uncomfortable dissonance. He has appeared in over 100 films since 1981, becoming an iconic and beloved character actor, all while maintaining complete silence about his presence during one of Hollywood's most tragic and mysterious deaths. This silence, whether motivated by legal caution, fear, or respect, has effectively made Walken complicit in whatever narrative has prevailed about that night. Initially the accident theory, and increasingly, as evidence has accumulated, something potentially more sinister. His unique position as the only disinterested witness, neither married to Wood nor employed by the couple, makes his continued reticence all the more significant as investigators attempt to finally determine the truth about Natalie Wood's final hours.
I actually don't think, I think she was dead when she hit the water. She was unconscious, when she hits the water. They said there wasn't any water in her lungs.
4. The boat's captain broke his silence and accused Wagner. For nearly 3 decades following Natalie Wood's death, Dennis Davern, the captain of the yacht Splendor, largely supported Robert Wagner's account of events. His initial statements to investigators aligned with the accidental drowning narrative, and he remained publicly loyal to Wagner, who had been his employer both before and after the tragic incident. But in 2011, Davern dramatically reversed his position, coming forward with explosive new claims that directly implicated Wagner in Wood's death and revealed a deliberate cover-up that had successfully misled authorities for 30 years. Davern's revised account, detailed in his 2009 book Goodbye Natalie, Goodbye Splendor, co-written with Marty Rulli, and subsequently expanded in interviews with investigators and media, painted a disturbing picture of the events aboard the yacht on November 28th to 29th, 1981. According to Davern, the tensions aboard the Splendor went far beyond the mild disagreement that Wagner had eventually acknowledged. In Davern's new account, Wagner had become increasingly agitated throughout the evening, consumed by jealousy over what he perceived as flirtation between Wood and Walken. This jealousy escalated into rage after dinner, when Wagner allegedly smashed a wine bottle and accused Walken of wanting to sleep with his wife. This confrontation, far more volatile than Wagner had ever admitted, reportedly led to Walken retreating to his cabin while Wood and Wagner continued arguing. Most significantly, Davern claimed that the argument between Wagner and Wood intensified rather than resolved as the evening progressed. He reported hearing the couple engaged in a heated verbal altercation that moved from the yacht's salon to the deck, directly contradicting Wagner's claim that any disagreements had been settled before everyone retired for the night. The most explosive element of Davern's revised testimony concerned what happened after he heard the argument move to the deck. According to his account, the shouting suddenly stopped, followed by an eerie silence. When Davern went to investigate, he found Wagner alone, who allegedly told him that Wood was missing. When Davern suggested immediately calling for help, he claims Wagner explicitly instructed him not to take any action, saying they should wait and see if she returns. "We didn't call for help because we weren't supposed to," Davern stated in his 2011 interview with investigators, a damning assertion that directly accused Wagner of deliberately delaying the search for Wood. This delay, approximately 4 hours between when Wagner allegedly discovered Wood was missing and when help was finally called, potentially denied Wood any chance of rescue if she had initially been alive in the water. Davern further claimed that during this delay, Wagner appeared more concerned with managing the situation than finding his wife. According to this account, Wagner made phone calls to shore, consumed more alcohol, and explicitly instructed Davern to get your story straight before authorities arrived, suggesting a deliberate effort to construct a false narrative rather than an honest attempt to explain a tragic accident. What makes Davern's revised testimony particularly significant is that it resolves numerous inconsistencies in the original accident narrative. It explains why the search was delayed despite Wood's known fear of water, making a voluntary departure in the dinghy implausible. It accounts for the defensive bruises and grab marks documented in the autopsy but never adequately explained. And it provides context for why Wagner's story has evolved over time, each revision potentially representing a strategic adjustment as he realized the original narrative couldn't be maintained. Skeptics have questioned why Davern waited so long to reveal these details, suggesting his revised account might be motivated by financial gain from his book or personal animus toward Wagner. Davern has addressed these criticisms by claiming he was initially intimidated into silence by Wagner's power and influence, and that he carried the guilt of his complicity for decades before finally deciding to reveal what he claims is the truth. Supporting Davern's credibility is the fact that many elements of his revised account align with physical evidence and witness statements that weren't publicly known when he first came forward. His description of the pattern of bruising on Wood's body, for instance, matches forensic findings that weren't widely discussed until the case was reopened. Similarly, his account of hearing a prolonged, heated argument is corroborated by witnesses on nearby boats who reported hearing a woman's voice in distress around the time Wood disappeared. The impact of Davern's revised testimony was immediate and significant. Within months of his public statements, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially reopened the investigation into Wood's death, a virtually unprecedented action for a case that had been considered closed for 30 years. This decision reflected law enforcement's assessment that Davern's new information was credible enough to warrant a complete re-examination of the circumstances surrounding Wood's death. For investigators, Davern's account provided a coherent alternative to the accident narrative, one in which Wood's death resulted not from a tragic mishap, but from an escalating conflict that potentially turned physical, followed by a deliberate decision to delay seeking help that may have sealed her fate. This narrative transformed understanding of the case from an unfortunate accident to a potential homicide, followed by decades of successful cover-up.
This morning, reports that Davern's co-author has given investigators new documents supporting that theory. Wood allegedly drowned here off the coast of Santa Catalina Island in the fall of 1981.
5. The case was reopened, and what police found was damning. In November 2011, 30 years after Natalie Wood's death, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department made the extraordinary decision to officially reopen the investigation. This unexpected development, rare for a case long considered closed, came in direct response to new information from multiple sources, including Dennis Davern's revised testimony and statements from other witnesses who had remained silent for decades. What investigators discovered in this renewed inquiry would dramatically transform the official understanding of Wood's death and raise disturbing questions about how the original investigation had been so quickly resolved despite significant unaddressed evidence. The reopened investigation began with a comprehensive review of the original autopsy findings, this time utilizing forensic techniques and expertise not available in 1981. This re-examination, led by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner Coroner, focused particular attention on the pattern of bruising on Wood's body, injuries that had been noted but inadequately explained in the original investigation. Modern forensic analysis determined that many of these bruises were inconsistent with the theory that Wood had fallen accidentally from the yacht or dinghy. The location, pattern, and depth of contusions on her arms, wrists, and face suggested impact from another person rather than contact with the side of a boat or water. Particularly telling were bruises on her wrists that appeared consistent with restraint, someone forcibly holding her arms, and defensive wounds that indicated she had raised her arms to protect herself from blows. Based on this new forensic interpretation, in January 2013, the medical examiner's office took the significant step of officially changing Wood's cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. This revised determination effectively retracted the accident ruling that had stood for 3 decades, acknowledging that the physical evidence suggested a more complex and potentially sinister series of events. Even more importantly, the coroner's amended report specifically noted that the bruises on Wood's body appeared to have occurred before she entered the water, a crucial distinction that directly contradicted the long-standing narrative that any injuries were sustained during an accidental fall. This finding aligned with Davern's claim that Wood and Wagner had been engaged in a physical altercation on the yacht's deck shortly before her disappearance. The reopened investigation also focused on the significant delay between when Wood was supposedly discovered missing and when authorities were finally notified, a gap of approximately 4 hours that had never been adequately explained. This delay became increasingly suspicious in light of Wood's known fear of water, which made Wagner's claim that he assumed she had taken the dinghy ashore in the middle of the night inherently implausible. Investigators also discovered troubling inconsistencies in how the initial investigation had been conducted. Witnesses on nearby boats who reported hearing a woman's cries for help around the time of Wood's disappearance had not been thoroughly interviewed in 1981. The dinghy, which was found beached near the shore with its oars neatly stowed, an unlikely condition if Wood had attempted to use it, had not been properly examined for evidence. And most disturbingly, Wood's body had been released for burial before all forensic tests were completed, potentially losing crucial evidence forever. Perhaps the most significant development in the reopened case came in February 2018, when the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially named Robert Wagner as a person of interest. This designation, which falls short of naming him a suspect but identifies him as someone believed to have information crucial to solving the case, represented a dramatic shift from the initial investigation that had quickly accepted Wagner's account without substantive challenge. "He won't talk, because if he does, this all ends very differently," observed one detective involved in the reopened investigation, referring to Wagner's consistent refusal to speak with authorities since the case was reactivated. This refusal stands in stark contrast to his initially cooperative stance in 1981 and raises obvious questions about why someone with nothing to hide would avoid assisting in determining the truth about his wife's death. The reopened investigation has also benefited from statements by multiple new witnesses who did not come forward in 1981. These include people who were aboard nearby boats in Catalina's Isthmus Cove on the night of Wood's disappearance, several of whom reported hearing a woman's voice calling for help around midnight, approximately the time Wood is believed to have entered the water. These cries, which continued for some time before suddenly stopping, directly contradict the theory that Wood slipped silently into the water without anyone's knowledge. Additional witnesses from the original investigation have revised their statements in significant ways. The harbor master who recovered Wood's body has provided new details about the condition in which she was found, noting that her fingernails were broken in a manner suggesting she had desperately tried to climb onto something, possibly the dinghy or the side of the yacht, before succumbing to hypothermia and drowning. While the reopened investigation has not yet resulted in criminal charges, it has effectively dismantled the accidental drowning narrative that prevailed for 3 decades. The revised findings, from the changed cause of death to the identification of Wagner as a person of interest, represent a fundamental reframing of Wood's death from tragic accident to potential homicide, albeit one that may remain officially unresolved due to the passage of time and the death of key witnesses.
She was either unconscious or had already passed away when she went into the water.
6. Her sister has fought for decades, and she says it was murder. While official investigations have proceeded methodically over decades, one voice has remained consistently insistent about Natalie Wood's death, her younger sister, Lana Wood. Since the night of the tragedy, Lana has maintained that the circumstances of her sister's death were suspicious, and she has waged a 4-decade campaign to challenge the accident narrative and hold those she believes responsible accountable. Her persistence has played a significant role in keeping the case in the public eye and ultimately contributing to its reopening in 2011. Unlike investigators bound by legal standards of evidence or journalists constrained by publication requirements, Lana Wood has been uniquely positioned to speak from both personal knowledge of her sister and emotional conviction about what happened that night. Her perspective combines intimate familiarity with Natalie's fears and relationships with the determination of a family member seeking justice for a loved one. "My sister didn't drown. She was killed," Lana has stated repeatedly over the years, most recently in her 2021 memoir, Little Sister. This unambiguous assertion reflects not just a sister's grief, but her interpretation of evidence and circumstances that she finds impossible to reconcile with an accidental drowning. Particularly significant is Lana's insistence that Natalie would never have voluntarily entered the water or attempted to operate the dinghy alone at night. According to Lana's account, Natalie's fear of dark water, deep water, where she couldn't see the bottom, was profound and well known to those close to her. This phobia stemmed from a childhood incident during the filming of The Green Promise, 1949, when a bridge collapsed during a scene, plunging the young Natalie into rushing water where she nearly drowned. The trauma of this experience created a lifelong fear that made even swimming in the deep end of a pool challenging for the actress. Beyond this specific phobia, Lana has provided context about Natalie and Robert Wagner's relationship that casts the events aboard the Splendor in a more troubling light. According to her accounts, Wagner had displayed jealous and controlling behavior throughout both of his marriages to Natalie. They were married from 1957 to 1962, then remarried in 1972. Lana claims that in the weeks before her death, Natalie had confided that she was considering ending the marriage for a second time, a significant claim that suggests additional tension aboard the yacht that fateful weekend. "She begged Natalie not to go that night. Natalie went anyway," noted one family friend, referring to Lana's alleged warning to her sister about the planned boat trip. This claim, while impossible to verify independently, suggests Lana had specific concerns about the yacht outing even before the tragedy occurred, concerns that have informed her subsequent campaign for a full investigation. Lana's advocacy has taken many forms over the decades. She has given countless interviews, written extensively about her sister's death, consulted with investigators, and directly confronted Robert Wagner on multiple occasions, including a widely reported incident at a public event where she approached him to demand answers about Natalie's final hours. These efforts, while often dismissed by skeptics as a grieving sister's inability to accept a tragic accident, have nevertheless kept crucial questions about the case in public discourse. What gives Lana's perspective particular credibility is how many of her long-standing claims have been validated by the reopened investigation. Her insistence that Natalie's fear of water made a voluntary nighttime boat excursion implausible aligns with statements from multiple people who knew Wood well. Her assertion that the bruises on Natalie's body indicated a physical altercation has been supported by modern forensic analysis of the autopsy findings. And her conviction that Wagner has not been truthful about that night is reflected in investigators' decision to name him a person of interest in the reopened case. Perhaps most significantly, Lana claims to have information about her sister's state of mind and marriage that provides crucial context for the events aboard the Splendor. According to her accounts, Natalie had been increasingly unhappy in her second marriage to Wagner and had confided to Lana that she was afraid of his jealousy and temper. If accurate, this information would align with Dennis Davern's revised testimony about Wagner's rage that night and suggest a motive for a confrontation that could have turned violent. Lana's most explosive claim, that Natalie was actively planning to leave Wagner around the time of her death, has gained additional credibility through statements from others in Wood's inner circle. Her agent and several close friends have confirmed that Wood had discussed making significant life changes in the weeks before the Catalina trip, including possibly ending her marriage once filming on Brainstorm was completed. Critics of Lana Wood have suggested her campaign is motivated by publicity or financial gain rather than a genuine pursuit of truth. However, her advocacy long predates the recent resurgence of interest in the case, and she has consistently maintained the same core assertions about her sister's death for 4 decades, even during periods when few were listening and no financial incentive existed. The persistence of Lana Wood's campaign speaks to the profound impact of unresolved grief and the human need for closure in the face of tragic loss. Whether or not her interpretation of events is ultimately proven correct, her refusal to accept convenient narratives that contradict what she knows about her sister has served as a crucial counterweight to the official accounts that initially dismissed any suspicious circumstances surrounding Natalie Wood's death. What really happened that night? When all 6 elements of the Natalie Wood case are viewed together, a disturbing alternative to the accident narrative emerges, one that aligns with the physical evidence, witness statements, and revised investigative findings. While definitive legal proof may remain elusive due to the passage of time and loss of evidence, the weight of available information points toward a sequence of events far different from what was initially presented to the public based on the testimony of Dennis Davern, the forensic re-examination of Wood's injuries, statements from nearby boaters who heard cries for help, and the significant, unexplained delay in reporting Wood missing. Investigators now believe the most likely scenario involves an escalating argument between Wood and Wagner that turned physical, resulting in Wood ending up in the water, either by falling during a confrontation or through deliberate action, followed by a failure to immediately seek help that ensured no rescue was possible. What makes this case particularly troubling isn't just the possibility that Wood's death was no accident, but the apparent success of a 4-decade effort to maintain a false narrative about that night, an effort that may have permanently prevented justice from being served. The combination of Hollywood power, institutional deference, inadequate initial investigation, and the passage of time has created circumstances where the full truth may never be officially established, despite the mounting evidence that the accident theory cannot account for the facts as we now understand them. Natalie Wood's death remains officially unsolved, but the evidence increasingly points to a truth far darker than the accidental drowning initially accepted by authorities and the public. The bruises that didn't match the story, Wagner's changing accounts, Walken's strange silence, the captain's explosive testimony, the damning findings when the case was reopened, and her sister's unwavering advocacy all point to the same disturbing conclusion. What happened aboard the Splendor that November night was no accident. While legal justice may remain elusive after so many years, the historical record can finally acknowledge what the evidence has long suggested. Natalie Wood's tragic end deserves to be understood not as a random misfortune, but as the result of human actions that have gone unpunished for over 40 years.